In 1981, 13,000 U.S. air traffic controllers went on strike after enduring 4 years of increasingly stressful and dangerous work conditions caused by the deregulation of the airline industry in 1978. The Professional Air Traffic Controllers Organization, or PATCO, took action by withholding their labor and demand for better wages, reduced hours, and up-to-date equipment they utilized on a daily basis. It only lasted 48 hours. However, the swift end of the strike was not due to the workers reaching a fair agreement with the Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA. As effective as their organized actions were, they were too good, as Jacobin magazine's author of The Legacy of the Crushed 1981 PATCO Strike, Glenn Houlihan, quoted an estimated 7,000 canceled flights in the U.S. during the first few hours of the strike. The FAA currently boasts an average daily flight count of around 45,000. Assuming their numbers were equivalent in 1980, the flight cancellations totaled about 6.5% of total U.S. flights scheduled on August 3, 1981. Fearing a daily exponential decline in airborne planes, the FAA went crying to their Big Daddy. You know him, you love to hate him, the one, the only, Ronald Big Daddy Star Wars Bucks Reagan. Yes, the U.S. air traffic controllers are federal employees. And yes, the federal government decreed it illegal for federal employees to strike, which is a good way for federal employers to relieve themselves of the accountability to improve wages, work conditions, and a work-life balance. That very same day, Big Daddy Star Wars Bucks took to the Rose Garden stage to order his peons to
get back to work!
It is for this reason that I must tell those who fail to report for duty this morning they are in violation of the law, and if they do not report for work within 48 hours, they have forfeited their jobs and will be terminated. End of statement.
This nationally televised event resulted in 11,345 out of the original 13,000, read as 87% of the strike force, getting the pink slip. Why did this event have such a detrimental impact on the American working class? Well, in true laissez-faire capitalist fashion, private business owners often mimic the behaviors of their our government leaders. Don't worry, we'll explore the term laissez-faire further down in the session. This mimicry is what models our workplace culture from the top down. U.S. government agents use suppression of democracy and rights, threats and violence to produce the outcomes they expect, and so do business owners, aka our employers. This isn't to say that no business leadership has ever been good or existed, or never provided a living wage or democratic workplace. They do exist, and more often than not operate as a worker cooperative, where every worker has stake, share, and ownership in the company. Worker cooperatives or co-ops are difficult to establish and find in the US, but they're there. For the rest of us more accustomed to the paradigms of traditional employment in the US, if you have spent any amount of time in the US workforce, you are intimately familiar with oppressive, hostile work environments that capitalism standardizes. You know, shit always rolls downhill, trickle-down economics, and all that jazz. I think it is safe to say that more of the global working class population, especially in the US, are waking up to or coming to terms with the fact that capitalism is a bad economic system. This viewpoint is not new or uncommon, but post 9/11, it is no longer considered a radical idea in the US by any means. The adults currently running society have seen a rapid decline in the quality of their lives over the past 40 to 50 years. The US median household income rose from around $21,000 a year in 1980 to about $55,000 a year in 1990. Bill Clinton was being praised for the economic surplus amassed during his term between 1993 and 2001. In 2000, US millennials were just entering the workforce and something interesting happened. Median household income reached around $60,000 a year, However, by 2010, that income figure dipped to around $55,000 a year, led by a 5-year period of income stagnation that hardly rivaled the median household income of American working class families during the first half of the 1990s. To appease the actually crowd, Generation X and millennials earn and have earned significantly less than their parents did in the early 90s when factoring in economic inflation between 2007 and 2016. More people in the household held gainful employment, people were working more, news reports covering the rise of productivity, GDP, and the stock market flooded our television screens. But why were individual and household incomes shrinking? What led to this rapid decline in the income of average working class families in the US? In short, capitalism. The recessions and depressions are baked into the system. Once working class wealth has regenerated and re-stimulated the economy, the wealthy find ways to gobble up that accrued national wealth through various methods: legislation, wars, bailouts, etc., causing yet another economic crash that the poverty and working class are left to shoulder and rebuild again. These recessions and depressions are predictable and necessary to sustain the institution of capitalism, with a major economic crash occurring every 4 to 7 years. Let's take a look at the following graphic to see how this trend plays out. In highlighted column 1, the first dip represents a reaction to the Fed's lowering inflation and the Tax Reform Act of 1986, which lowered taxes for the wealthy from 50% to 28% and increased the tax burden for the working class from 11% to 15%. The following spike represents the accrued surplus that President Clinton was held for during his first term and secured his place as presidential incumbent. In column 2, the dip represents the working class income loss due to funding the war on terror that started in 2001, which was a hidden transfer of wealth to the top. If we examine column 3, just as the US began recovering from its half-decade-old war, we see yet another economic crash. This was also a transfer of wealth. This period is noteworthy due to the infamously publicized too big to fail bank bailouts in 2008. In column 4, after over a decade of economic recovery, they capitalized on the COVID-19 pandemic and the expected economic crash, and the drop between 2019 and 2020 represent yet another transfer of wealth. All transfers of wealth represented flow from low-income working class earners to the top 5% of income earners in the US. Some of you might be asking, if income got worse over time, why the spike from 2014 to 2019? Keep in mind that the figures displayed reflect the median household income, which earnings are a sum of multiple people's earnings from gainful employment. This spike can be attributed to people losing jobs, homes, not being able to afford school tuition, working multiple jobs, moving back in with parents or family. More people claiming residence to the home increases the household income. For the individual, income has stagnated at around $20,000 a year since the 1970s. The Clinton administration sowed the seeds of today's military-industrial complex, spurring the now normalized, unlimited spending in military and police force budgets. It was also the Clinton administration's infamous 1994 crime bill that laid the foundation of today's prison-industrial complex, with a fervent push from then-Senator, current President Joseph
"Fund the police"
Biden, in a superiority contest with the conservatives to prove who's more adept at maintaining the institution of racism, who could be tougher on crime.
It was the Biden bill. A guy named Biden wrote that bill, and he wrote that bill by going down and sitting down with the President of the United States of America, Bill Clinton, President of the United States of America. He wanted 100,000 policemen. He does not view this as a social issue as opposed to trying to bring peace and security to the streets. As governor of the state of Arkansas, he presided over, as governor, the execution of individuals within the state and the death penalty. He supports the death penalty. He is the fellow who insisted that I bump this up from initially. When I said, where are we going to get the money? He said, well, all I know is I want 100,000 cops. I made that commitment. He had endorsed the Biden crime bill as a candidate when he ran. He is the one who talks about the need for stiffer penalties. The president is very, very straightforward and simple. He knows there are two basic steps here. One step is you must take back the streets. And you take back the streets by more cops, more prisons, more physical protection for the people. So I hope this crime bill, when it passes, the Biden-Hatch crime bill, as it becomes law, God willing, I hope that we will have ended once and for all this notion that is a hangover from the 60s, that somehow Democrats are weak on crime and Democratic presidents are weak on crime and Republicans are tough on crime. The consensus is A, we must take back the streets. It doesn't matter whether or not the person that is accosting your son or daughter or my son or daughter, my wife, your husband, my mother, your parents. It doesn't matter whether or not they were deprived as a youth. It doesn't matter or not whether or not they had no background that enabled them to become socialized into the fabric of society. It doesn't matter whether or not they're the victims of society. The end result is they're about to knock my mother on the head with a lead pipe, shoot my sister, beat up my wife, take on my sons. So I don't want to ask what made them do this. They must be taken off the street. And Madam President, we have predators on our streets that society has, in fact, in part because of its neglect, created. Again, it does not mean because we created them that we somehow forgive them or do not take them out of society to protect my family and yours from them. They are beyond the pale, many of those people. Beyond the pale. And it's a sad commentary on society. We have no choice but to take them out of society. And the truth is, we don't very well know how to rehabilitate them at that. We must make the streets safer. I don't care why someone is a malefactor in society. I don't care why someone is antisocial. I don't care why they become a sociopath. We have an obligation to cordon them off from the rest of society, try to help them, try to change their behavior. They are in jail, away from my mother, your husband, our families. But we would be absolutely stupid as a society if we didn't recognize the condition that nurtured those folks still exist. And we must deal with that.
In 2008, as if by the snap of the infinity gauntlet, the lives of millions of middle-class laborers and families evaporated. Everything they accumulated through the fruits of their labor vanished through layoffs, foreclosures, and gun-to-your-head health insurance legislation, then known as Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act. Job and food security, stability, pension and retirement funds, nest eggs, the finances, homes, time as people had to work more, and health as the unemployed and underemployed were often barred from access to prohibitively expensive health care, and employers were not legally required to offer federally mandated employer-sponsored health care for part-time positions. In a mad dash to keep as much profit as they could, the majority of retail and sales and service-based employment shifted from offering full-time positions to offering only part-time positions. As a former worker of both companies, I can remember when Walmart and Home Depot adopted this practice. Workers now had to contend with the loss of time available for earning income. On the flip side of the coin, they also had to contend with the loss of available personal time. With the option of full-time employment unavailable, many had to, and still do, take on multiple jobs. This manufactured labor inflation created an approximate 50% loss or depreciation in the value of an individual's time and labor, which in turn forced an individual to work longer or for multiple employers to make ends meet. Working-class laborers in capitalist societies have had to develop resilience by necessity, as they are intimately acquainted with loss. It rules our lives, governs and dictates our decisions and actions. We lose our hopes, dreams, and identities in the mad scramble for income to afford yet another week's groceries in the kitchen, to keep the water running, to keep the lights on, and a roof over our heads. The 2008 crash also revealed something to much of the working class population throughout the US and internationally. The too big to fail bank bailout scheme put our governing bodies' greed on full display. With the advent of the internet, it became near impossible for high-profile corporate and government corruption to remain hidden. The jig was up. We had entered the age of disillusionment with the system and whistleblowing. In the US, people learned the truth behind the war on terror, and in Afghanistan, the use of torture became the mainstream hot topic in the early 2000s. 2011 had the Occupy Wall Street and Arab Spring movements. In 2013, Edward Snowden informed the world that our governing bodies were spying on us. In-your-face exposés and documentaries by journalists or filmmakers, think Michael Moore, led to the adoption of more reactionary authoritarianism by our governing bodies, and an increase in military and police forces. If you just glimpse over world history, you will find no shortage of the wealthy and powerful employing violence to take what they want and to keep what they have. The entire world's history has been shaped by this dynamic. Heck, the entire First Testament of the Christian Bible is riddled with bloodshed and war over holy rights claim staking of land, cattle, agriculture, or the economy. Feudalism, colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism are all economic maladaptions that serve one function: justifying and enabling the should be classified as mental illness, greed. Adam Smith, considered the godfather of laissez-faire capitalism and the modern economy, philosophized humans are self-serving by nature, but as long as every individual were to seek the fulfillment of his or her own self-interest, the material needs of the whole society would be met. To break down Adam Smith's eloquently worded philosophy into layman's terms, humans are inherently selfish and will take extreme measures to profit by nature. Profit in this context meaning any positive gain that will enhance the quality of their lives, be it a gain in money, power, influence and notoriety, resources, or any measure of wealth respective to the culture of the day. And if connotations of the word lazy spark when you hear the term laissez-faire, you're not wrong. The definition of laissez-faire is a policy or attitude of letting things take their own course without interfering, which suggests helping by not helping, otherwise known as indifference. Indifference is not bad in itself and great when building mindful resilience against the unpleasant circumstances of the life experience. Indifference becomes an act of negligence and contempt when the people who desired the responsibility of governing power willfully and willingly choose to perpetuate and turn a blind eye to the suffering of the governed. And before some of you more studied economists mentioned my omission of Adam Smith's philosophical caveat regarding common good capitalism, and I quote, "Every man, as long as he does not violate the laws of justice, is left perfectly free to pursue his own interest in his own way, etc., etc., end quote. This is where modern day capitalism maladapts, as capitalists abandon this altruistic notion of justice. According to OpenSecrets.com, since 2020, up to the year this was recorded, 2022, U.S. governing bodies have consistently raked in over $3.5 billion each year from lobbying. If you're not familiar with lobbying, it is a legal, state and federally recognized institution and career path one can take. So what does a lobbyist do? Well, those of you who watched House of Cards should remember the character of Remy Danton, portrayed by the Academy Awards-winning American actor Mahershala Ali. They negotiate with and deliver legal bribes and policy legislation written by powerful corporations to governing bodies, so the wealthy corporation owners can legally protect themselves from the consequences of their actions. Lobbyists like Remy Danton act as mouthpieces for corporation owners, an elite pawn used not only to negotiate, but to intimidate, coerce, and to take ethically and morally questionable actions on their behalf. Muckraking and smear campaigns have existed since there have been presidential candidates in the US. The practice in itself is nothing new. Interestingly, lobbying became a legal, federally recognized institution in the United States in 1995 via the Lobbying Disclosure Act of 1995, which is basically a flex by the corrupt power structure, which boisterously states, "We're too tired to find ways to hide our corruption because it takes too much work, so we'll make it legal." fortifying the staying power of the lobby institution, in which a few individuals in a society of millions essentially shape the laws we all have to abide by, making their harmful actions against humanity and the environment protected. And in the true spirit of the capitalist philosophy, justifying their quote-unquote hard decisions and despicable actions as promoting the common good. Here's an example of an honest-to-God argument I overheard regarding the 20-year war in the Middle East. It sucks that people die in the Middle East over oil, but look at the thousands of oil-based products made available to people globally, including the gas in your car. Don't you like driving? This is not for the common good, but to keep growing the profits. If you want to know why minimum wage has been stagnant since the mid-70s, there's your answer. So, we already know capitalism is bad. We already know it's a brutal, uncaring system. We already know that most, if not all, politicians are corrupt and the corporations are greedy. We know what the problem is. How do we fix it? You already know the answer to that. We need to adopt a different economic system. Where's the general strike? Where's the revolution? They will happen, but in the future. You see, the general population does not want to resort to violence. And with the insurmountable arsenal of the monolith called the United States military standing in the way, a lot of people don't have the stomach for getting brutalized or shot for acting on their courage or frustration. Most people want to survive to see old age and retire quietly to watch their children and grandchildren grow. That cannot be achieved if you're the unlucky recipient of a 9mm or 5.56 round served to you by the National Guard. Most of the fears of the global working class are valid. Seeing the working class's penchant for non-violence and employing it only in self-defense, why do the wealthy and powerful have such an extreme response to cries for economic equality? The answer to that is, capitalism is what you call a zero-sum game. Zero-sum meaning whatever is gained by one side is lost by the other. So if you feel I was being a bit histrionic in my emphasis on willingly and willfully, it's because a capitalist does not believe in equality. A capitalist does not believe in sharing. A capitalist's only concern is acquiring more of what's valuable to them. I wanted to research the human condition of greed, which I originally planned to present to you in a different way for a completely different topic, but something interesting happened. First, I found that many others believe that greed should be listed as an official mental illness. It's really no different from hoarding, only its spectrum extreme. One understands the views of a greed-stricken individual, however, no one really addresses the motivations. We've all experienced moments when our eyes were bigger than our stomachs. We pushed our luck too long at a slot machine or a card table. We've all at some point bitten off more than we can chew, literally and figuratively. Throw in your favorite colloquialism for overextending, overindulging, or oversaturating. While Eastern philosophies emphasize practicing moderation to extreme asceticism, asceticism being defined as severe self-discipline and avoidance of all forms of indulgence, Western philosophy prescribes a go all out, give it 110%, go big or go home attitude towards conspicuous consumption. This human tendency to overdo things is a central tenet of capitalism. Yes, we judge the greedy, we label them as selfish and sociopaths, we shame them, and let's continue to do so. We are currently living through what happens when you allow the greed-stricken to rule society. I am not suggesting sympathy or pity. We understand that the greed-stricken will go through great lengths to protect themselves from loss. Sun Tzu said in The Art of War, "Know thy enemy." So, I took his advice and set off to understand what the greedy was most fearful of. I also wanted to research their acquisition tactics and how they worked against us. I went and searched for a definition of the fear of loss. I queried the search engines with the simplest ways I could pose the question, and I have to be honest, the answer felt a little dramatic at first. Surely I wasn't asking the right question. After several more hours and attempts to find a simple and layman's definition for the fear of loss, all signs pointed to the following word. This is a scene from director Jerry Zucker's 1990 romance fantasy Ghost, starring the late Patrick Swayze and Demi Moore. I recall my grandmother forcing my cousins and I to watch these scenes as punishment for being too loud or something. I as she berated us for our transgressions and explained that we would share Willie's fate for being too bad. These scenes were especially traumatic for a child under the age of 10 who was indoctrinated from birth in the Baptist Christian ideology. When you are raised Sunday in and Sunday out, surrounded by a mass of hundreds who subscribe to the propaganda of eternal suffering and damnation in hell for making the wrong choices in life, it can leave a lasting psychological scar that persists even after someone abandons the Christian belief system.
You're dead, Willie.
The moans of the demons, coupled with Willie's blood-curdling cries for help, became a vivid reminder of the unseen horrors and retribution that possibly awaited. Persuading subservience, adopting self-imposed censorship, thought control, and behavior monitoring. This is the best possible tool and outcome for a laissez-faire capitalist who doesn't want to have to lift a finger and wants to control society. This is also predominantly why the United States is ran by evangelical Christians who proclaim North America to be an ironclad Christian nation. Going back to our earlier question, what is the word that defines the fear of loss? Thanantophobia. This term is literally where the Marvel villain Thanos gets his name from. In the Marvel Comics universe, Thanos acts as a harbinger of death in his self-appointed charge to maintain balance in the universe through his version of resource management. What is Thanantophobia? Well, it is defined as a form of anxiety characterized by a fear of one's own death or process of dying. It is commonly referred to as death anxiety. The greedy feel that loss of anything equates to their physical death. If that fact raises questions about why U.S. governing bodies have been inept in addressing life-threatening conditions like homelessness, access to healthcare, and food, it's because they are literally indifferent toward the survival of anyone and everyone who does not adequately provide them a source of supply. Narcissism aside, the acquisition of more stuff, money, power, possessions, resources, and people give these afflicted individuals a sense of immortality. When you take things away from a greed-stricken individual, to them, it feels like you are literally killing them, taking away their ability to survive and years of their lives. They truly believe their cache of valuables inoculates them from the suffering of the world, contribute to their longevity, and will ultimately shield them from death. This fear is what drives U.S. right-wing conservative ideology and the basis of maintaining the status quo, the concept of keeping things the same and slow, controlled, incremental change, so long as that change does not separate a greed-afflicted individual from their accumulated materials, resources, wealth, power, or influence. This chase for immortality and unchallenged perfection is achieved many different ways, leaving a legacy and symbolic immortality. Leaving a legacy is rarely cited as the mission objective of the offender. They want to achieve symbolic immortality. What is symbolic immortality? Think of the name of any famous dead person throughout history. The person in your mind right now has achieved symbolic immortality for the time being. J.D. Rockefeller and the 19th and 20th century robber barons served as the epitome of capitalist symbolic immortality, and I don't think any more needs to be said about that. They are experimenting with ways to physically extend their lifespans, not to minimize the positives that have come from artificial organ production, organ transplants, cloning, mapping the human genome, stem cell research, CRISPR research, and the like. But when it comes to the rich and powerful, it seems like science fiction delusions are currently driving the cryogenics and consciousness transfer markets. We've all heard about Walt Disney's Frozen body. While there is an argument to be made that cryogenics has and could continue to be a boon to humanity's longevity, the initial motive for the idea was not so noble in reality. Cryopreservation of sperm was achieved and normalized in 1954, and while it aids women with fertility issues, the creator of the human cryogenics concept, Robert Ettinger, was not shy about his motives in his 1962 book titled The Prospect of Immortality. See, you didn't even have to read the footnotes. Every human has to address their fear of death sometime in their life. The impermanence of this experience is what creates the beauty and suffering of being a human being. The greed-ridden individual cannot face or come to terms with their obliteration, and owning as many resources as they can is their way of coping with old grandfather time. As much as they try to avoid this law of nature, they understand that humanity as a species are ruled by the fleeting fragility of life. They understand that every moment is as precious to you as it is for them. However, time is intangible and cannot be shored up in a container. The greed-stricken also realize this fact, but they still want to take more for themselves. Remember, capitalism is a zero-sum game, so when you go to take back what was taken from you, the powerful greedy have an arsenal at the ready. Here's where laissez-faire rears its ugly head. The greedy aren't into expending effort to get their needs met, therefore, they spend billions and trillions of dollars annually on research and development of more advanced weapons of death that are easier, faster, and stealthier to employ. You're reading that graphic right. It reads constant dollars. Constant's definition means occurring continuously over a period of time. In other words, unlimited funds. This is also why the American working class can't have good things. A free public healthcare system, social safety nets, affordable housing and food. All of our common goods are being funneled into the unquenchable military-industrial complex. First world problems, am I right? Now, the purpose of this session is not to condone any malignant behavior toward the greedy. However, if a revolution is to happen to bring about meaningful change to the global working class, some socially unsavory behavior may need to be employed to properly defend the lives and livelihood of Americans in the coming future. While not yet officially classified as a mental disorder, we should take proper measures to curb greedy behavior, just as we have taken measures to ensure everyone isn't displaying and asserting their sexual prowess in public. The U.S. direly needs to invest in mental health and spend time researching the human condition of greed, to start taking measures to prevent the greed-stricken from harming society through their self-justified pursuit of gain at all costs. As a reaction to this plausible loss, the U.S. state and federal government officials continue to turn a blind eye to gun control and actively ignore the public and health officials' cries for and opportunities to invest in accessible, affordable mental health services. According to Statista.com, as of 2020, there were only 12,275 registered mental health treatment facilities in the U.S. Couple this with there being only 6,090 medical hospitals in 2020, a staggering decline from the count of 71,156 medical hospitals in 1975 in the U.S. Because greed ultimately becomes self-destructive to the individual, we have to remember that greed does not only afflict the rich and wealthy. It is, as stated earlier, part of the human condition, and everyone deserves to be treated with empathy, compassion, and respect. If you've ever watched the show Hoarders, or know anyone personally, you have been witness to the anguish and distress parting with their belongings causes a hoarder. The quality of their lives are siphoned away by the mental disorder. Out of shame and fear of judgment, hoarders often self-isolate, as they don't want people to see the filthy and cluttered conditions they live in. Most of all, they self-isolate because if the people in their lives knew about their horrid living conditions, they would be pressured into parting with their belongings. Hoarding also creates pain and fissures within our social circles. This condition affects not only the afflicted, but their friends, families, and loved ones. A hoarder's self-imposed isolation pushes their loved ones away, leading to feelings of rejection. And people are less apt to visit someone living in an indoor landfill. Feelings of resentment may also appear, as it is often the friends and family of a hoarder that is left with the monumental task of clearing their accumulated mass of materials in order to save their housing or after they move or die. I am personally familiar with hoarding. This very situation has affected my family, as a couple of close relatives of mine had the disorder. The disorder worsens with age, and it's a heartbreaking condition for everyone involved. While the Hoarders Show claims that over 3 million people are afflicted with hoarding, I doubt they are including the billionaire class that currently rule the lives of their lower class peers. To set the record straight, there is fundamentally no difference between anyone who appears on the show Hoarders and, say, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, or anyone currently within the millionaire to trillionaire spectrum of net worth. They are just doing it on a much larger, global economic scale. We've all heard folktales and parables warning against greed as children. Nathaniel Hawthorne's King Midas and the Golden Touch, Aesop's fable, The Flies in the Honey Pot, Rumpelstiltskin, and The Juniper Tree by the Brothers Grimm. The exploits of capitalism are projections reflective of and executed by mentally ill hoarders with an irrational fear of death who impose their fears on you with systems of social control to gain more materials so that they can save themselves the blood, sweat, and tears of an honest day's work. And in the greatest projection of them all, we should take the 1994 Senator, now President Joseph Robinette Biden's advice if we want to fix our capitalism problem.
They are in jail, away from my mother, your husband, our families. But we would be absolutely stupid as a society if we didn't recognize the condition that nurtured those folks still exist. And we must deal with that.